Welcome back to Investing Talk podcast. Today we're going to really zoom in on Dominari Holdings,
DOMH.
DOMH, and we've got a pretty fascinating collection of recent information that you shared with us.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do here is really try to unpack what matters the most. We're going to cut through the noise and try to highlight those key insights. You're looking for clarity without being overwhelmed. So we're on the hunt for those aha moments that are often hidden in the details.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. We've got a lot of data here, preliminary unaudited financials for their fiscal year 2024, details on some really big strategic investments, a few management changes, as well as a dividend announcement. We also have a general overview of the company, how the stock's been doing recently, an analysis of their financial health, and even a due diligence report from earlier this year. So it is a lot to digest, but we're going to guide you through the parts that really stand out.
All right, so let's just jump right in. And the first thing that caught my eye was this revenue growth. Dominari Holdings reported a massive 900% increase in revenue for FY 2024. They jumped from just about $2 million to $19 million in revenue. The fourth quarter alone brought in over $8 million. So this kind of growth is certainly eye-catching. What's the engine behind this?
Well, one of the primary drivers appears to be their strategic investments. One notable move that they made was co-founding American Data Centers.
Okay.
Dominari holds a 32% stake in that. And so what this does is it positions them in the energy-efficient data center market, which is a space with a lot of potential. Additionally, they received approval from Finorado to really expand their securities operations. They added 50 new seats and locations. So this expansion in their financial services arm seems like it's been a major contributor to that revenue surge.
It makes a lot of sense, and they kind of add another layer on top of their strategy. They established a Bitcoin treasury by investing $2 million into BlackRock's iShares Bitcoin Trust ETF. Now, for those unfamiliar, an ETF is basically a fund that trades like a stock, but it holds a basket of assets, and in this case, it's tracking the price of Bitcoin. So this move into digital assets is definitely something to take note of.
For sure. And on top of that, they've also brought on some very high-profile people as members of their board of advisors, Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump.
Wow.
And the stated focus of their involvement is AI and data center investments. So this could be a very strong signal about the future direction and priorities of the company. It definitely raises the question of how their specific expertise will contribute to those areas.
That's really interesting. So alongside all this growth and strategic maneuvering, Dominari announced a special cash dividend of 32 cents per share. That totals about $4.6 million, whether you're invested in Dominari or just keeping tabs on the company. This is something that you'd likely find pretty relevant. It's a pretty tangible return to shareholders in the midst of all this expansion activity.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Now let's take a step back for a second and kind of look at Dominari Holdings as a company. It's described as a diversified holding company. They have operations in both biotechnology and financial services.
Okay.
Now, while their biotech side still exists through subsidiaries like Aikido Labs, it does seem like their main focus is increasingly shifting towards fintech and financial services, particularly through their wholly owned subsidiary Dominari Securities, which offers brokerage advisory and investment banking services.
Got it.
So this diversification could be a real strength, giving them multiple avenues for growth and reducing their reliance on any one particular sector.
Makes sense. So looking at the market, recent activity shows that the stock price jumped by 12.55% on March 31st, 2025. However, the information we have also suggests that the stock has been pretty volatile, with some technical indicators giving mixed signals.
Right.
So this kind of price movement is definitely something you want to keep in mind if you're tracking DOMH.
Yeah, absolutely. And, looking at their overall financial health, that 900% revenue increase is definitely impressive on the surface. But, the reports also highlight some potential concerns. There are mentions of high debt levels and some challenges with profitability. For example, their EBIT margin in a recent period was negative 180.3%. And to kind of break that down, that means that for every dollar of revenue they brought in, their core operating costs were almost 3 times that amount.
Wow.
So this suggests that there's a fundamental challenge in their current business model to actually generate a profit, even with this really rapid growth that we're seeing. Additionally, their growth appears to be somewhat tied to strategic acquisitions and partnerships, which naturally come with their own set of risks.
Yeah, so it's interesting because we see these challenges, but at the same time, this diversified business model and those strategic partnerships, like the one forming American Bitcoin, are still viewed as strengths that could potentially boost shareholder value down the line.
So it's kind of a balancing act, isn't it? High growth potential, but currently struggling with profitability.
It really is. And, when we look at the wider industry landscape, Dominari's focus on AI data centers and these other emerging technologies
Mm.
really puts them in alignment with trends that we're seeing from some of the major players out there, like Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. But this also means that they're entering a very competitive space.
Right.
And in financial services, they're up against giants like Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. So their diversification and their strategic alliances could be key to differentiating themselves. But achieving scale and market share is probably going to be an ongoing challenge for them. That's interesting. So the due diligence report that you shared has some really crucial financial details in it. We don't have the very latest earnings per share numbers, but the company reported a net loss of $22.9 million for their fiscal year 2023. This suggests a trend of negative EPS. And because they're not currently profitable, we can't accurately calculate a price to earnings ratio, which is, a very common metric investors use, to assess how much they're paying for each dollar of a company's earnings. Now, the sources we have also don't provide info on their debt-to-equity ratio or free cash flow. And this really underscores the importance of looking at their official SEC filings, particularly their Form 10-K, for a more complete picture of their financial situation. Similarly, given those net losses, their return on equity is also likely negative.
Right.
So we're seeing some things here that are,
Yeah, and the report also touches on the company's valuation and the risks involved. A price-to-book ratio, which compares a company's market value to its book value, isn't available in these sources. Dominari also doesn't seem to be paying any regular dividends, which, isn't uncommon for companies that are very focused on growth. Their involvement in things like cryptocurrency could lead to some more volatility in their stock price. Some of the key risks that the report identified include potential regulatory challenges, just the general volatility of the markets. And the fact that they received a 15-day extension to file their Form 10-K, so that delay in their official annual report, is definitely something to keep an eye on.
So bringing it all together, what does this mean for the informed learner out there trying to make sense of all of this? Dominari Holdings presents this really interesting story of very high growth aspirations that are fueled by these strategic moves into potentially lucrative industries. Combined with an expansion of their existing financial services business, the addition of these high-profile advisors adds another layer of intrigue. But it's super important to weigh this against the current challenges that they face when it comes to reaching profitability and their reliance on the future success of these partnerships. The volatility we're seeing in the stock price also signals a need for some careful and considered analysis.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. We walked through the significant revenue surge, their strategic investments in data centers and Bitcoin, the addition of these advisors and the dividend announcement. We also examined their business model, their stock performance, and some key aspects of their financial health. Noting both that really impressive growth, but also some areas that need a little more scrutiny, such as their profitability and their debt levels.
This situation really begs the question, how do you balance this high level of revenue growth and this strategic positioning against the current challenges in profitability and their dependence on the future success of these strategies? It seems like the mixed reaction that we're seeing in the market really reflects this dilemma.
It does. And for a more in-depth understanding, it will be really crucial to look at Dominari Holdings' upcoming earnings reports, as well as those official SEC filings, especially that Form 10-K that we mentioned. Keeping an eye on what's going on in the data center and fintech industries, as well as any regulatory changes that might happen, will also provide some valuable context as you continue to follow this company.
Absolutely. We hope this deep dive has given you a much clearer perspective on Dominari Holdings. Based on all this information that you shared, there's always more to uncover, and we strongly encourage you to continue doing your own research. If you found this helpful, please subscribe, like, and leave us a comment. We always appreciate your engagement, and we look forward to bringing you more insights right here on Investing Talk Podcast.
See you next time.
See ya.